My name is Margaret Ellis. I'm 71 years old, a widow, and for most of my life I worked as a hospital accountant. Numbers have always made sense to me. People, especially my own family, not so much. On Christmas morning, I carried a small cardboard box into my kitchen, brushed the frost off its lid, and opened it with the same curiosity I once saved for birthday cards from my children. Inside was a fruit basket, apples bruised at the edges, grapes sliding loose from their stems, a block of cheddar wrapped in plastic. Tucked beneath the crinkled paper lay a card that read, in hurried handwriting, "Peace and love, the kids." I stared at it, waiting for a warmth that never came. Instead, I felt the hollow echo of obligation, like they were checking off a list rather than reaching for my heart. Before I could put the basket down, my phone buzzed with a bank alert. I wiped my glasses thinking I'd misread the numbers. But there it was in black and white, $17,560 charged to my credit card at Alpine Ridge Lodge, the kind of ski resort I'd only ever seen on glossy travel ads. My knees went weak, and I had to grip the counter to steady myself. I opened my laptop, and sure enough, their smiling faces filled my screen. My children, Daniel, Monica, King, and Claire, posing in matching jackets in front of a slope glittering with artificial snow. The caption read, "Family tradition continues. I didn't see myself in that picture. I saw the bill." A knot of anger tightened in my chest, tangled with something worse, betrayal. I had handed them my trust years ago when I added them as authorized users on my account, back when I believed helping them meant holding the family together. Now, I realized I had simply given them the keys to hollow me out. The fruit basket sat on the table between us, cheap and impersonal, a cruel reminder that they thought a token gift could disguise a theft. I lifted the card again, ran my finger over the Rush signature, and whispered into the empty kitchen, "Do they even see me anymore?" Outside, snow kept falling against the windows, quiet and relentless. In that silence, a thought took root, sharp as the winter air. This Christmas gift wasn't kindness, it was a receipt. And for the first time in years, I knew I wasn't going to pay it. I left the fruit basket on the counter and made myself a cup of tea, though I couldn't taste a thing. The steam fogged my glasses, and through the blur I kept seeing the number, $17,560. I said it aloud, testing the sound of it, as if speaking it might make it less absurd, but it wasn't absurd. It was theft, dressed up as a family vacation. My house was quiet, too quiet. I'd lived in this Vermont farmhouse for nearly 30 years, and the silence that once felt peaceful now pressed heavy against my chest. I listened for the sound of children running up the stairs or the smell of cinnamon rolls in the oven, but those belonged to another decade. What I had instead was a fruit basket bought on sale and a hole in my bank account big enough to swallow months of my retirement savings. I carried the basket to the trash and stopped halfway. Some part of me, stubborn, maternal, hesitated. Throwing it away felt like throwing them away, and I wasn't ready to admit that's what they'd done to me. So I set it by the back door, telling myself I'd deal with it later. I opened my old ledger book, the one I'd kept since before my husband passed. Each page was a tidy column of expenses, notes in my careful script, numbers that told the story of my life better than any photograph. And as I flipped through it, I saw the trail of my generosity laid bare: tuition checks, car repairs, medical bills, rent deposits. Every time one of my children had stumbled, I had been there with my pen and my account number. A wave of nausea hit me. I pressed my hand against my stomach and closed my eyes. How many times had I told myself it was temporary, that once they found their footing, they'd stand on their own and maybe, just maybe, turn around and steady me when I grew unsteady. Instead, they'd learned something else, that I was the safety net that never broke, the wallet that never closed. The tea had gone cold. I set the mug aside and pulled out my laptop again. Their photos were still up, a parade of smiles that seemed to mock me. Monica in designer sunglasses, Daniel raising a glass of champagne, Claire flashing a peace sign with cheeks red from the cold. They looked like a postcard family, and I was nowhere in the frame. I wanted to call them. My hand even reached for the phone. But what would I say? That I'd seen the charge? That I felt gutted? They'd twist it. I knew they would. They'd tell me I was overreacting, that I was imagining slights where none existed, and maybe, if they were feeling bold, they'd remind me that I'd given them permission. They weren't wrong, I had once. I stood and walked to the window. Outside, the snow was falling in thick, lazy flakes, settling on the bare branches and stone walls. It should have been beautiful, but all I felt was small, and tired of pretending. On the counter, my phone buzzed again with another alert, this time a smaller charge, room service. $98 for lobster ravioli and a bottle of Pinot Noir. My throat burned. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. That was when something shifted inside me. It wasn't rage, though my hands shook. It wasn't grief, though my eyes stung. It was resolve, cold and sharp, like the edge of ice cracking across a pond. I closed the ledger, slid the fruit basket out the back door, and locked it behind me. Tomorrow, I told myself, I would go to the bank. And for the first time in years, I wasn't going there to withdraw. I was going to take something back. The next morning, I drove into town with the snow still clinging to my windshield. The heater groaned against the cold, and I gripped the steering wheel tighter than I needed to. It felt like I was heading into battle, though the field was only a local bank with gray stone walls and sliding glass doors. Inside, everything smelled faintly of disinfectant and carpet glue. A young man in a suit that didn't quite fit greeted me with a rehearsed smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Ellis. How can we help you today?" I set my purse on the counter and unfolded the printouts from my ledger. My voice wavered only once. "I need to remove 3 authorized users from my credit account, effective immediately." He blinked, the way people do when they expect a different kind of errand from an old woman. "Of course," he said, fumbling politely. "May I ask who?" I listed their names. Saying each one out loud felt like pressing on a bruise. Daniel, Monica, Claire, my children, carved into official paperwork not as family, but as liabilities. The young man clicked through screens, nodding. "Done," he said finally. "They no longer have access. Any further charges won't go through." I exhaled, and the breath carried a weight I hadn't realized I'd been holding. For the first time in years, my money belonged to me alone. Relief seeped in, but so did grief. It felt like locking a door in my own house, a door that used to open freely for laughter and noise. On my way out, I stopped at the ATM, withdrew a small stack of 20s, and slipped them into my wallet. Not because I needed the cash, but because I wanted the tangible reminder I was the one holding the account, not the other way around. That afternoon, I met with a lawyer named Helen Briggs. She was about my daughter's age, sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, her office lined with shelves of binders and the faint scent of peppermint tea. She listened quietly as I explained what I wanted, a new will, one that no longer split my estate among my children. "I'd like to establish a scholarship," I told her, "for women over 50 who want to return to school. Something small, but meaningful." Helen tilted her head. "That's a very specific choice." I traced the rim of my teacup, because I know what it feels like to be dismissed once you're past a certain age, to feel invisible. If my own family can't see me, maybe a stranger will benefit from what I've saved. She nodded, took notes, and slid the forms across the desk. I signed each page slowly, my pen scratching against the paper like footsteps on fresh snow. Every stroke was final. Every stroke was mine. By the time I finished, the folder was thick with signatures, and my hand ached. Helen closed it gently, almost ceremoniously. "It's all official now," she said. I sat back in the chair, staring at the closed folder. It felt less like paperwork and more like severing an umbilical cord that had been tying me to their needs for too long. A second birth, but this time for myself. When I left her office, the sun was already setting, casting long shadows across the parking lot. I sat in my car for a long while, watching the colors bleed across the sky, pink, orange, then fading into a deep, aching blue. I thought of Daniel and his health scares, Monica drowning in her divorce, Claire chasing half-formed dreams. Part of me wanted to drive to them, to explain, to soften the blow, but another part, the part that had signed her name a dozen times that afternoon, knew there was no softening this. It wasn't cruelty. It was survival. On the drive home, the radio played an old jazz standard my husband used to hum while fixing the leaky sink. The melody wrapped around me like a blanket, reminding me that once upon a time I'd had a partner, someone who carried the weight with me. Now I carried it alone, but at least I was carrying it on my own terms. When I pulled into the driveway, the fruit basket was still outside by the back door, frozen grapes now shriveled, the cheddar blocks splitting at the edges. I picked it up and tossed it into the trash bin without hesitation. My hands didn't shake this time. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a fresh page in my ledger. The columns were blank, waiting. For once, the story of my finances and my life wasn't being written by anyone else. Tomorrow would come with new conversations, new battles, but tonight, as I capped my pen and closed the book, I felt something close to peace. Daniel's house smelled of cinnamon and pine, the artificial kind that comes from candles bought in bulk. His living room was crowded with holiday decorations, though the holiday spirit had long since drained from me. I sat on the edge of the couch, my coat still on, while my 3 children circled like restless shadows. Daniel was first to speak, his voice sharp with rehearsed indignation. "Mom, I don't understand why you're making such a big deal about this. It was one charge. We were going to pay you back." I looked at him, my firstborn, the boy I once carried through nights of fever, now a man in his 40s who still hadn't learned the weight of responsibility. $17,000, I said. That isn't a casual mistake. Monica crossed her arms, her bracelets clinking as though to punctuate her irritation. "You're acting like we robbed you. Families help each other. Mom, isn't that what you always taught us?" "Help?" I repeated, tasting the bitterness of the word. "Yes, but this isn't help. This is taking." Claire sat on the arm of a chair, her eyes flicking from sibling to sibling, saying nothing. Her silence was louder than their protests, and it pierced me deeper than any accusation. Daniel leaned forward. "You're victimizing yourself. You've always wanted to control everything, money, choices, the way we live. Maybe this is just your way of punishing us for not living up to your standards." The air thickened. For a moment, I thought I might crumble under the weight of their combined stares, the way I had countless times before, but not this time. I reached into my bag, pulled out the thick envelope I had prepared, and laid it flat on the coffee table. The sound of it hitting the wood silenced the room. Inside were copies of receipts, canceled checks, and credit statements, every dollar I had covered in the last 2 years. Tuition, medical bills, car repairs, overdue rent, $75,000 in black and white. I spread the pages slowly, like a dealer laying out cards, each one undeniable. "Look at it," I said. My voice was steady, though my hands trembled. "This is not generosity anymore. This is erosion. Piece by piece, you've chipped away at me until there's almost nothing left. And the worst part? You don't even see it." Monica's lips parted, as if she had a retort ready, but the words never came. Daniel shook his head, muttering under his breath. Claire lowered her gaze, cheeks flushed with shame or anger. I couldn't tell which. I stood, pulling my coat tighter around me. "I am done being your safety net. I am not a bottomless well, and I am not your bank. From this day forward, you will live within your own means. If that feels like punishment, then perhaps it's because you've mistaken dependence for love." The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. The only sound was the crackle of the artificial fireplace in the corner. I gathered the remaining papers, slid them back into the envelope, and tucked it under my arm. My legs felt heavy as I walked to the door, but each step carried a strange clarity, like the first breaths after surfacing from deep water. Daniel's voice chased me, sharp and defensive. "You'll regret this, Mom." I paused at the doorway, hand on the knob, and turned just enough to meet their eyes. "No," I said softly, "for the first time. I won't." Then I stepped outside. The cold wrapped around me instantly, biting my cheeks, but I welcomed it. Snowflakes swirled beneath the porch light, each one unique, each one fleeting. Behind me, the muffled sound of raised voices rose and fell, but I didn't listen. The driveway crunched beneath my boots as I walked to the car. I looked back once, not at the house, but at the darkened windows where shadows shifted behind curtains. They were no longer my burden to carry. I started the engine, the headlights cutting through the falling snow, and pulled onto the road. Ahead of me stretched miles of winter, quiet and uncertain. But for the first time in years, the silence felt like freedom. The cabin was little more than a box of timber tucked into the Vermont hillside, a place most people would call too small, too plain. To me, it was sanctuary. When I turned the key that first night, the smell of raw wood and dust greeted me, and I felt both unmoored and strangely free. For decades, I had lived in spaces filled with the echoes of my children, doors slamming, laughter, demands shouted down hallways. Here, the silence was absolute, and for the first time, it didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like my own. Mornings became rituals. I rose early, stoked the stove until the cabin creaked with warmth, and set water to boil for tea. Steam swirled into the air, mingling with the faint scent of cedar smoke. I sat at the narrow kitchen table with my ledger open, the columns waiting for new numbers, numbers that belonged to no one but me. Writing them down was like learning a new language, one where my worth wasn't measured in what I gave away. I filled the long afternoons deliberately. I joined a small book circle at the library in town, women my age who brought casseroles to share and spoke of novels like they were maps for survival. Once a week, I drove through icy back roads to meet a therapist who listened without judgment as I unraveled the knots of guilt that had held me for so long. And slowly, I started playing music again. Old jazz records spun on the turntable, scratches and all, their notes curling through the cabin. At first, the sound felt too big for the space, but then it settled, filling corners that had been hollow. Even so, doubt lingered. Some nights, when the wind howled against the windows, I wondered if I had cut away too much. Motherhood doesn't come with an off switch, and the instinct to provide still pulled at me like a phantom limb. I would remember Daniel's tired eyes, Monica's sharp voice hiding her fear, Claire's restless energy, and for a moment, loneliness struck like ice water poured down my back. But then I would breathe. Remind myself, love isn't measured in how much of yourself you surrender. One evening in late January, I poured a glass of wine and curled by the fire. The flames hissed as snow slid from the roof, shadows swaying across the log walls. I opened my journal and wrote, slowly, deliberately, I am learning to stand without being leaned on. The words steadied me, the way figures on a balance sheet used to. That was when the knock came, 3 firm raps on the wooden door, startling in the quiet. My pen slipped, blotting the page. For a heartbeat, I simply sat frozen, my pulse thrumming in my ears. I wasn't expecting anyone. Visitors didn't come this far up the hill in the dead of winter. I rose and crossed to the window. Through the frosted glass, I saw a figure hunched against the cold, breath fogging in the air. The porch light cast her face in fragments, but I knew her instantly. Claire, my youngest, shifting from foot to foot in a coat far too thin for the storm. I opened the door. Snowflakes swirled in, clinging to the rug. Claire's cheeks were flushed, her eyes wide and uncertain. She held an envelope in her gloved hands, extending it toward me as if it weighed more than it should. "Mom," she said, her voice trembling with cold and something else I couldn't yet name. "This is for you." Claire's hand trembled as she pressed the envelope into mine. The paper was soft from the damp, corners curled from her grip. I stared at it for a moment, unsure if I had the strength to open it. When I finally did, I found a check inside, $500, scrawled in her uneven handwriting. "It isn't much," she whispered, eyes darting away. "But I wanted to start, to try." The fire crackled behind me, filling the silence that stretched between us. For years, my children had treated money like a faucet that would never stop running. And now here was my youngest, offering back a single drop. It wasn't the amount that mattered. It was the shift, the choice. I reached out and brushed the snow from her hair, strands melting into droplets on my palm. "Claire," I said softly, "this isn't about the money. It's about you learning to stand." Her lips trembled, and for a moment she looked like the child I used to tuck in on stormy nights, terrified of thunder. Now she was grown, shivering not from cold but from uncertainty, and for the first time, I didn't rush to shield her. I let the space remain, a space where she could find her own footing. We sat by the fire, neither speaking much. She sipped the tea I placed in her hands, and I watched her thaw, little by little. My heart ached with a mixture of grief and hope, the same way an old wound can ache when the weather changes. When she finally rose to leave, I didn't beg her to stay. I simply walked her to the door. "The door will always be open," I told her, "but only if you walk through it as the woman you're becoming, not the child who leans too heavy." She nodded, eyes glistening, and disappeared into the snow. I closed the door, leaned against it, and let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. The cabin was silent again, but it no longer felt empty. I picked up my journal and wrote the words that had been circling my mind all night. I have made myself whole. And for the first time, the words felt true. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family drama and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day.